Hello and welcome to episode 120 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. We've had an email from Stephanie about moving into a career in software development. Stephanie writes, I've spent the last few years climbing the corporate ladder in the retail industry, and the higher I've gotten on said ladder, the more I've come to absolutely despise it. But I'm too high up now to come down. I'd love to study development at school, but I just don't have the time. As such, I've been doing my absolute best to teach myself as much as I can, with the eventual goal of landing a job in software development. I've been trying to get as much practical experience as possible. I host as many of my own services as I can. I work on personal software projects in my free time, and I daily drive Linux on all of my machines. I'd love to hear from the hosts how they got their jobs in their respective companies, and if they have any tips for newcomers to the industry on what skills to learn and what they should look for in an entry-level position. Well, let me just say this as someone who isn't a professional developer. If you want to get into any career, do the thing until they pay you to do the thing, is my broad advice. But before we get into advice on what Stephanie should do practically, briefly, how did you all get into the jobs that you're currently doing? Amalith, you've talked about this before. You kind of just stumbled into it.
Yes, I started with Nixnet, publicly self-hosting a bunch of stuff, and got into this community around a paid service I started using. And I really liked the service, the technology they were using, and decided I might want to work for them. So I asked someone I knew was associated with them whether they were hiring. They didn't have any public job postings or anything. So it was just, are you hiring? Not officially, but we can. Are you interested? To which I said yes. And then a few days later, they hired me. And I think that was partially because they recognized my name from Nixnet, partially because of the experience I'd built up. But I think it was mostly because of the passion and interest I showed in the technologies we would be working with. I actually liked it and wanted to get into it.
I did a maths degree because I liked maths. I got really excited about a thing called artificial life, which is basically modeling biological systems in computers. I managed to get someone to pay for me to do a master's in artificial life, then managed to persuade someone to pay me to be able to do a PhD in the same thing. Realized I'm absolutely terrible at academic stuff and I should never have gone anywhere near it. And then managed to get a job because the hiring manager thought that people with PhDs were smart. And then I've had various jobs since then.
My story is probably a little bit non-standard, but for the most part, I think it boils down to I liked software engineering, so I started doing programming, met other people that liked doing programming, and through talking about it, they were willing to give me a shot or a foot in the door to try and work for them. That led to other opportunities, and through some various life events and things, I've moved around between various places, but the whole through line has been that I've always enjoyed programming, and I've always tried to do that as much as possible, even when not directly paid for that. I've used the software engineering side to assist in the jobs that I've had, and that's always paid off to the point where I eventually started writing some open source, got known for some of that open source, and just continued to write software. And little by little, it's just about who you know and finding somebody that will give you an opportunity and proving that you can do the thing and doing the thing until someone pays you for it, like Joe mentioned.
Yeah, it's definitely worth doing the thing because that's how you get better at doing the thing. So I'm pretty lucky that I've always just absolutely loved. As soon as I bumped into a computer, I was like, I have to spend more time with this thing. This is my new friend. And so I absolutely love it. So I've always spent loads of time doing it, and that's how I got better at it. And that has benefited me in the work that I've done.
I don't think it's really your friend, Andy, is it? It's the thing that you tell what to do. That's what you fell in love with, telling it to do exactly what you wanted.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? But yeah, I think that excitement about it, that the fun of it and loving it, at least with some companies and some communities, that is recognized and is a helpful and good thing. I think there are different types of companies, but some companies wouldn't care what qualifications you've got or anything like that. They want to see the work that you've done and what you're interested in and what you're capable of. And, I think that's different from some careers. Like you can't become a lawyer by just like being really excited about the law and reading about it in your spare time, even though you might become very knowledgeable and capable by doing that. But I think at least with some companies in software development, you can do that.
But arguably, it'd be much easier to pass the bar exam if you had spent years being enthusiastic and reading loads about the law.
Yeah, maybe, but you would still have to pass it.
Yeah.
And it still would take a whole lot of extra work to do that.
Yeah, whereas with the software development side of things, if you've got a GitHub or equivalent of that that's got loads of projects that you've made and or contributed to, that's what people are looking for, right?
At least some people, yeah. And I have caveats about that because it's very excluding of people who don't have time to do stuff in their spare time. But yeah, some companies will see a lot of stuff that you've got on GitHub or even some other source code website. And if it's good stuff and you've shown that you can get stuff done, then that will carry weight with them.
Yeah, one thing that jumped out at me about this email that we received was that Stephanie is already somewhat high on the corporate ladder and wanting to make this change into software development, which could mean changing over into a somewhat junior position, but also that Stephanie didn't have time to, or didn't feel like she had time to go back to school for software engineering. And that's, I think, somewhat of a misconception about software engineering. I mean, maybe it's going away now, but software engineering is definitely one of those fields where, sure, degrees do help and the knowledge that you gain in college does help, but it's not one of those things that's absolutely hard required. In fact, I'm actually seeing very few job openings now that are hard requiring a degree. They want you to have the skill, and then through interviews or being able to show open source projects, they're going to want to assess that you have some of the knowledge required to make design-driven decisions. But it's not a hard requirement. So it's absolutely possible. But that means either a lot of either studying at night, which in software engineering is best done through doing. You make projects.
And depending on the company, if there is a degree requirement, sometimes they will pay for you to go and get that degree.
Yeah, I've seen where they'll either pay for it or they will just accept X number of years of experience in lieu of a degree. And sometimes that X number of years of experience can be in open source or in personal projects. One thing, though, that I think is important with these projects is a lot of people, I believe, get hung up on, I need to make a project and I need to get it popular. I need to get it out onto GitHub and get thousands of stars in order for it to hold any weight for an employer or in order for them to gain any sort of experience. And that's not true at all. I've seen people have a project on GitHub that was just solving a personal problem for them. And that holds the exact same amount of weight to an employer's eyes, usually, because they can still look through the code. They can still see what your thoughts were as you were designing, or you can walk them through the code. And you still gain all that experience of trying to build that software. It doesn't have to be popular. It doesn't have to be the next takeover thing. And in fact, sometimes when it is the next takeover thing or gets thousands of stars, you lose all of the time or sometimes even the enjoyment of doing it because now you're spending all your time doing like issue triage and reviewing of pull requests, which is still good experience to learn and to gain, but that can sometimes detract from the base skill of, writing code and building a project, designing a project, and implementing said project.
I totally agree. It doesn't need to be popular at all. It just needs to be evidence of your work. But I saw that Stephanie said that she was working on personal projects, but also things like setting up services and things like that. And that's totally cool. And you can learn all kinds of stuff from it. I would really encourage, if you're doing this partly as a career move, to make sure that as much as possible of what you're doing for learning is also publishable. So if you write some code to deploy some services, put it on your GitHub or your source control website, put it all up there, publish it, and do stuff that you can publish, not because it's going to get popular, but because it builds up that set of evidence of what you've done and what you can do.
And that goes very nicely with the next thing I would say is, this is going to sound like it's going against everything I just said a second ago about don't try and make popular projects. However, once you've made the projects, like Andy just said, make them public or make them publishable, you should try to advocate for your projects. Try to get other people to use them, whether it's a application that someone can use, try to get friends or family to use it, try to get other colleagues to use it. Try and get somebody to use your stuff. If it's a library, try and see if other projects could find it useful and will integrate it into their projects. The reason is, again, not to get popular. The reason is to gain those skills of, one, trying to market your projects, which is important, but also you're going to find so many other perspectives from other developers, other users that you just will not have seen. It's unavoidable. And trying to figure out how to massage those points or polish off the points that people find difficult, that will all help you in designing software. And sometimes you're not going to agree with the feedback. Sometimes you're not going to agree, or a user's going to do something wrong and it's going to be super frustrating to watch, but that's all great feedback to get because That's the way software is in the real world. Not everyone thinks the same. And sometimes as you're designing software, you will not have foreseen the way someone's going to use it or try to use it. And so this is all super invaluable. So try to advocate for your software. Try to get people to use it if possible, even if only in a test scenario.
Try and finish it in some sense, right? So make a website, make an installer, write up the instructions on how to use it. Just dumping some stuff on GitHub is not going to get you very far. But if it's a proper project that people could use and people could go to the website and see that it is a thing that really exists, then it makes it far more impressive, and it also advocates for people to use it.
And that leads to a question of, well, what should I be building? What do I want to build? Should I build the next Facebook? And that's kind of a difficult question if someone's getting into development. It sounds like Stephanie has at least a decent idea about what she wants to do. But sometimes that's difficult for people as they're transitioning jobs. They don't know what the left and right limits are. They don't know what's possible to build and what's easy and what's hard. So I usually start with saying, build something you want to see. Build something that makes your current life a little bit better, whether that be something at work, whether that be something at home. And also, if you have a technology in mind already, let's say you know you want to get into front-end web design space, then pick a technology and then try and overlap those two things. Can you make something better using that technology? Try and learn how that can happen. And sometimes you'll find out that you can't, or that it's not easy, but that's okay, because that's all great experience to get. And whatever it is, just pick something that you will find useful, because that's also how you're going to continue to keep up the motivation, or actually have some motivation to continue and figure out how to solve this problem, is by solving something for yourself. And you're going to have the most knowledge about that problem space as well, because a lot of programming is trying to first figure out what the problem space is and figure out what you don't know in order to build the solution for said problem. And if it's something you're currently struggling with, you're going to be very well aware of all of the problems in that space.
What about collaborating? What about contributing to existing open source projects? Because my understanding is that one of the biggest parts of being a professional developer is working on other people's code, or at least projects that you didn't start.
That is a huge piece of being a professional developer. So it is an invaluable skill, and one that I would highly recommend once you are getting into development to start to try to do. And you can do them in parallel. You don't have to do one or the other. You can contribute to other people's products while also building your own. And in fact, if you go that route of trying to integrate your product into other people's, you'll get a little bit of both. And it is extremely important. However, starting out that route, I don't always agree with those recommendations, because a lot of times getting into existing software is very hard. Legacy software especially is very hard. And you're also reading somebody else's design and thoughts that may not align with your own, and may not even be fully fleshed out, which makes it all the more confusing. So it's really difficult to get in there. And then if you can get over that hurdle, sometimes getting your contributions into someone else's project, there's a very high barrier to entry there, because they might want their code formatted a particular way. They might want certain tests to pass. So there's just all kinds of little hurdles that are not necessary when you're working on your own projects. That's why people usually recommend like starting off with documentation. And while that's good, it'll help you learn a project. If your real goal is to get into software development, starting off with documentation is okay, but you need to move beyond that into code pretty quickly.
I remember I had quite a lot of experience of writing C++ on my own. And then when I got a job writing C++, it was a whole different thing. And it was, I improved rapidly, but it was a totally different experience. And I think trying to learn C++ by doing that, being thrown into the deep end like that, would have been extremely difficult. So I would definitely say there's a balance between getting involved in other projects and doing individual stuff. And I think often people who are already employed as software developers will do open source so that they don't have to deal with that stuff, right? And just do something on their own. So that's not the situation here. And the other thing I was going to say was, it is feasible for you to target a particular company. If you see a company doing some open source stuff, you can try and get into their project and do stuff that's useful to them. And there are companies who absolutely, when they're hiring, will look and see who can we hire who's already contributing. So that is a possible route, with the caveats about it. But also, those contributions aren't wasted if you don't manage to hook that one company, right? That's just a kind of a focus for you.
Andy mentioned caveats. I would say some words of warning. I absolutely agree that that's something you could do. And I would even recommend people to do. But there are slight warnings where you can get maybe slightly overzealous working with some companies, and you don't want to end up doing work for free for them. As in, if it is a professional product that they're putting out and they are paying all the other developers on the team, and then you get so integrated, you may enjoy that work. However, you're at that point a free developer for them. And they may not even intend it that way. It may not be malicious. It may not be any malintent. However, that can happen where some of the top contributors are actually just individuals on the internet. So it's not a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. If you get into that situation, your ultimate goal is to try and land a job. At that point, it may be worth asking the company, do you have any open roles right now? Because I'm already doing a lot for you. Or it may be an opportunity to look for other projects to contribute to as well in a similar manner.
You definitely got to be cautious about being exploited. And if it turns into like a 3-year job interview and they get to just abuse that time, then that's definitely bad. So yeah, that's a really good caveat. Thanks, Kevin.
There's also a common fear that a lot of people I've talked to who are either getting into open source or trying to make career changes, they have a visceral fear about releasing their code to the public. And that fear is not usually that some company's going to steal it and make $1 billion off of it or $1 trillion or whatever. It's usually just that people are going to think the code is bad or they will get made fun of for the code. And I have yet in my X number of years doing both open source and closed source development for companies, ever seen somebody be made fun of for code that they've been put out. I'm sure it has happened somewhere on the internet. I'm sure it happens today. However, that has got to be an extremely rare occurrence, especially if it's put out in good faith, as in this is the code that I had. Now, you may look at your code later on yourself in a few years and be terrified at what you wrote. However, you can also see like the progress that you've made. And sometimes that's good stuff to go back and refactor. I go back and refactor my old code on GitHub routinely if I get bored. And sometimes I am disgusted at what I wrote, but it's all good learning.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxdevtime.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at linuxdevtime.com/support. At the beginning, I said do the thing until you get paid to do the thing, but you do kind of need to get some qualifications, at least for your resume, right?
I don't think you necessarily need paper qualifications. You need something that you can show an employer that says you are capable of performing the job they want to pay you for. So whether that's open source, whether that is a private project that you want to show them privately, whether that's work experience or a degree, like these are all various ways that you could do it, or a boot camp. But you just need some way to show the prospective employer that you can do the job that they want to pay you for.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth looking at different places, because some places are probably quite dogmatic about things like degrees, but there are definitely people out there who are not, who are more flexible and are looking to find people by unconventional routes.
There are some places that not only care about degrees, they also care about how you did in high school and even earlier than that. And their interview process is rather tricky, I've heard.
In all seriousness, I think somewhere that has a hiring regime that you don't like the sound of is probably not a good place to work, and you should apply somewhere else.
I think that's a great sniff test.
I always say the interview is a two-way street. They are interviewing you. You are also interviewing them to see if that is a company that respects you and would be an enjoyable place to work, or as enjoyable as can be as work can be. There are also a bunch of core software engineering principles or bits of knowledge that are absolutely useful in software engineering that are not necessarily captured by just showing open source or showing some code. So traditionally, that's things like algorithms and data structures and how to design a program. And if you're going to get into software engineering, I would recommend knowing at least the basics around that, because they are very applicable on a day-to-day basis in the abstract. So what I mean by that is not that you will be asked to give the big O notation of a particular sorting algorithm on the daily. You won't be asked to do that, or at least in any job I've ever seen, you won't be asked to do that on the daily. However, you will be given the latitude to design and implement a particular problem space and subset of a problem. In doing that, you should pick the best method that you know of to accomplish that task, which might mean, hey, is this particular way to sort faster or more efficient in some metric that I care about than another? And you need to be able to communicate that to the team articulately in a way that they can also digest and understand, and a way that makes sense to them. Otherwise, you have to rely on just the trust me, or this is how I happen to have written it, then that is a much harder way to like gel with a team and get your designs across.
I always like to learn by doing, and a lot of things like, say, writing a sorting algorithm or hash map or something like that, you can implement something like that. Like obviously you'll implement a bad version of it and it won't be like professionally enterprise ready, but it's a great way to learn like what the issues are involved in designing something like that.
It sounds like you're saying try and understand the deeper concepts, not just this code accomplishes this small task. Like try and understand a bit of the why rather than just the what.
Very much so. After you get past the, I would say, junior or entry-level developer positions, which can be very just accomplish the task. Once you get beyond that, you will need to know some of the deeper concepts about why a task is done in a certain way, or you'll have certain constraints and metrics that you have to stay under. And that you have to start considering all kinds of things like how efficient something is or how memory efficient something is. And there will be all these things that you have to keep in the back of your mind that inform your decision and inform your design, that if you just go about and make the code work, it may not actually quote unquote work because it won't hit those particular metrics or constraints. And loads
of this stuff just comes with experience. So don't expect to like be on top of all this stuff. Don't feel like you're useless if you're not on top of it, but just get experience where you can and you'll learn things.
Yeah, I think a lot of the senior engineers that I've worked with, it's a lot of intuition. They know where the hard problems are. They kind of just intuit where certain problems are going to happen or how to do a particular thing. They know what works and what doesn't. They know where the hard problems are that don't seem hard, and they know what easy problems are easy that, sound hard. So a lot of it's just intuition that's built up through experience, and that's really hard to gain through a book, but that's fine because you'll get experience and you'll move up that ladder as well.
Back with documenting the why versus the what. My father is very much a senior software developer. He's been doing this for longer than I've been alive, actually. And he is pretty adamant that he doesn't ever want to see a comment explaining the what. He can read the code to find out the what. He wants to know why, because in particular functions, it might be that it's written in a particularly gnarly way. And as you're reading it, you're thinking, why was it written like this? Well, if the comment only describes what the code does, but it was written that way for a particular reason, then the next guy coming is going to try and refactor it and improve it, leave it better than they found it, and find that it breaks because it was written like that for a reason.
There's also a funny point where the why can become dogmatic and people forget what it's there for, which is hilarious. So why type comments are absolutely go for the why, or don't write down the what or the how. But what's funny about the whys is whenever you see a why comment, you always have to reassess the code right below it and determine whether or not that still holds and it's still true.
I do think also documenting the what is useful.
Now, even I, as a non-developer, know that one of the most fundamental things that you need to get good at and learn is Git. So my question to you three is, do you actually need to learn Git proper, or is it good enough to learn one of the abstraction layers?
I think it's harder to learn an abstraction layer. The command line of Git maps quite directly to what it does. If you use an abstraction layer, it probably will surprise you from time to time because it's trying to pretend stuff is not the way it really is. So when I teach Git, I teach it at the command line with no extra tools, because then you understand what it's actually doing, and it's much easier. It's not that bad. Like, it has bad names for things, but the ideas are not that bad.
I very much agree with that. I think for an entry-level position, you need to learn the basics, obviously. However, to move beyond that, you very, very quickly should know a deeper level of Git. The problem with Git, beyond just the bad naming of things, is that the surface area of it is so wide and the paradigms and concepts are somewhat foreign if you're not familiar with those types of things. So an abstraction layer on top of it can help show you the most important items, commits, branches, tags, all those sorts of things. They can show you the important parts that I would recommend while learning the top level part through an abstraction layer, if that's the route you're going to go. Also look at the underneath, look at the command line variant, or look at some of the different books about how Git works. But learning that layer down below is something that's overlooked a lot in software engineering. At least I would say at the intermediate levels and below, sometimes even into the senior levels, there are people that just don't know Git that well other than the basics. And when you do know Git very well, it's like a superpower. It makes you stand out from other developers as well, especially if you're able to come in and fix some very crazy history or do some Git wizardry. It makes you stand out. And it's one of those things that it's not that difficult to learn if you put in some time and some effort into it. And it's one of those things that will really elevate you and separate you from the rest of the developers.
I heard this description of Git a while ago that I really love. Someone described it as a version control toolkit, not a version control system in itself. Git provides you the mechanisms to come up with your own version control system, and the VCS you come up with is how you use Git. It's your Git workflow. And it might be that some of the abstractions on top of Git don't mesh well with whatever workflow your particular team has developed, but the Git CLI will always be able to do any of that with no trouble.
Yeah, I've always equated Git to be like the Swiss Army knife, although that's 6 to 8 inches wide with 300 tools inside of it. You might use 1 or 2 of those tools regularly, but when you look at it, you just see 300 tools all crammed together and you don't know what each one of them does or exactly how to pull them out. You need something to say, hey, the knife and the tweezers are probably the 2 most important parts, maybe the scissors.
So just to be absolutely concrete, if you're just getting started, the things you need to be able to do with Git is make a commit and push that commit, and possibly check out someone else's branch so that you can do a review or something. And if you're advanced from the point of view of a developer, you can go as deep as you like into Git, and it's incredibly rich and complicated. But if you're a developer, when I say you're using a Git in an advanced way, all I really mean is you've got multiple branches on your computer, so you're working on multiple things at the same time, and you have the ability to adjust the set of commits that you're currently working on so that it looks like you did everything in a really logical and sensible order, even though actually it was a normal chaos. So if you can deal with multiple branches on your machine, switch between them and stuff like that, and you can change history on your local machine, not for everyone else, but just for you, so that your commits are nicely organized, that would be what I'd call advanced use of Git.
I probably use commit, push, and rebase more than any other command.
So just one general piece of advice I've got is find a good company and try and get in there. Not like seeking out an individual company, but if you apply for jobs, you find someone who you like, even if they're offering you something that's not quite what you expected or what you wanted. If they're a good company, get in there and you may well have an opportunity to move into an area that fits you better. If they really are a good company, they will spot what you're good at and they will want to put you into the best position.
Right, well, hopefully you found that helpful, Stephanie, and maybe some other people did as well. But we'd better get out of here. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.